Everyone out there in YouTube land, Dan here from GeekCast Radio, doing another one of my From the Long Box reviews as I talk about a classic comic from my long box, give you my thoughts and opinions on it, let you know how it shaped my fandom. And for a lot of these series, these were books that I talked about so far that I remember reading and reviewing and really impacted me to become the fan that I am. With this, The Punisher #5 that I'll be talking about, it's a little bit different. I was a rather big Punisher fan growing up as a kid, but I didn't read a lot of the comics. It was more so just the idea of him. We had a huge Punisher poster. I shared a room with my brother, and on our wall it had the gigantic Punisher, hugely muscular. He was shooting this gigantic machine gun with all this fire coming at him, but he was staring at it, dead on, because he was that badass that so many people come to respect. And for some reason, as a kid, I had a fascination with guns. I don't really know why. My parents didn't own guns, but I was a huge fan of G.I. Joe. We had a lot of toy guns. We played a lot of war growing up, and the Punisher, he had the coolest guns. I remember even reading some of the Punisher, I forget what they were called, but they were just a comic full of all of his arsenal, and you just saw the different guns he had. And that was a thing people did. And I remember reading it and being like, look at that bazooka. And it was kind of cool in my mind. I haven't read this. I don't even remember what was in this until I reread it again. I knew the cover, but that was about it. This is the 5-part mini. This was the last issue, and I read it and thinking, okay, well, let's see how this holds up years upon years later. And, I've enjoyed at the time, too, a lot of the other Punisher things. I remember the Punisher Dolph Lundgren movie, kind of liking that, loving the Nintendo game, which is not that great for my recollection. But I do love the Punisher Xbox game that came out. I think it's been, 14 years ago. So that was a brutal game that I did really enjoy. One of the better Marvel games. But I picked this up to see, okay, how does it hold up? It's not in the greatest condition in the world. It wasn't at the time. And reading it now, it's Punisher. It's the last of this storyline, and he's trapped by this character, Alaric, who's this gang-like character who's caused a lot of grief in the community. And he has the Punisher trapped in this gas chamber, and the Punisher is trying to get out. How can he escape? He's being basically suffocated. Utilizing his ingenuity and some of the weapons that he has, he's able to escape and enact his revenge. And it does include some of the classic Punisher villains, including Jigsaw, who obviously, probably the most notable of all the Punisher villains. Punisher is not really known for, in my mind, great villains outside of Jigsaw, but you have this entire gang of other people dressed up in the Punisher, garb or Punisher-like garb, trying to take out the Punisher. And there is this really great panel, a fight of the Punisher just laying waste to Jigsaw with huge ease, and so much so that it's when you beat the crap out of someone so much that everyone around them just gets scared and runs away, even though they have guns. And a lot of them, it's that classic 80s trope of being such a tough guy that you scare everyone and they just run away and hide. And getting it and reading it, beginning, I'm like, okay, obviously, this is Punisher killing a bunch of people. We know the story. There might not be much here outside of that, just kind of the one note aspect of the character. But by the end, I was actually surprised by it gets a little bit into the psychology of the Punisher, and he does begin to question his actions at one point, asking if he's just propelling more violence, if what he's doing is just as bad as the person he's trying to take out. Is he actually fixing things, being the Punisher, which is something just thinking back at the time that I couldn't remember him ever really doing, but there was a little bit more nuance perhaps than it was expected. And even some chances to take out some people. And I should indicate who wrote this, but it's plot by Stephen Grant, script by Jo Duffy, and the layouts it's interesting, the layouts by Mike Vosburg, and finishes by John Betty. So it's interesting looking at the credits like that, because there's so many more credits in a comic of this time than now, where a lot of artists, even you have the inker, the artist, and that's about it. You don't have really someone else doing layouts, but the art's pretty strong. I do think it's a little the backgrounds tend to be really non-descriptive, and there's not much there. Like you can see this as indicated here. There's really the characters and not much else, but mostly that you're just doing a fight sequence that was I think well executed in that sense. But it's just this empty background with not a lot of huge huge amount of detail. You can see why in like today's comics, it takes artists a lot more time to kind of write one or draw one issue compared to then, because there's much more called upon them. And but it's fun, and I did like where it ended up in the end. I do think that's a great looking Punisher right there. That's a great look on his face, and it gives you a lot of that attitude you want from the Punisher. But this sequence, I think, is where I started to actually take this a little bit more notice of what this was trying to do, as he goes square down with another of the kid's father, of Alaric's father, or his son goes square to square with him, and he stares down at the Punisher. He wants to kill the Punisher, and the Punisher kind of explains what he did, why he did, and try not to have the same sins of your father and the choices that he made. He puts himself on the line there, and I thought it was interesting to see the Punisher kind of not just go out and kill someone, even when he gets that type of label of just being this madman killer. It's interesting when he chooses not to kill, and the reasonings for that. And sometimes that it makes him much more of a rounded character. And I think it even fits into the very end sequence where I think it's his girlfriend goes to try to chase him down, and not the Punisher's girlfriend, but Alaric's girlfriend, and it doesn't go that well. And we see her hanging off the edge of the bridge, but he doesn't kill her. He just decides that, as he says in his own words, that sometimes you're better off not doing anything at all. And utilizing how that was said earlier about how the Punisher was debating that him doing everything he was doing, him going and killing all these people, it didn't maybe end up doing anything. Maybe doing nothing was better than anything at all. And then it coming back around to those last moments of making that same choice reminded me something of like Batman Begins, right? Where Batman is given the choice of saying Ra's al Ghul or not saving him, and he chooses that he didn't kill him, he just chose not to save him. Similar situation there. So this is I think this was, I don't remember a huge amount of the time, because this came out in 1986. I think this was around the time when the Punisher was just really becoming big, and he eventually had a lot of huge series, Punisher War Journal, and maybe I'll do some reviews of those as well. But I think Punisher is one of those characters that shouldn't have lasted nearly as long as he has, but when you get a good writer behind him, and I think Matthew Rosenberg recently in his current series, I think had the best line, where Punisher is a easy answer to really complex problems, and sometimes that easy answer can lead to some complications afterwards, and when you try to use that, but people tend to utilize and use the Punisher when they want to, he can be a tool, and he'll do the dirty work, but then he gets kind of judged by characters that think they're above him, oddly enough. So if you are, I'm curious. I know Punisher have a lot of fans, probably Punisher fans that are screaming at me because I'm missing details I should be picking up or don't know much about the history of Punisher. As I said, as a kid, I was more infatuated with the idea of the character and who he was rather than actually reading the comics. But going back to this, and I was kind of pleasantly surprised by the execution of this series, and I could see why he eventually became such a huge figure and for such a long time, and one of the bigger Marvel characters of the 80s and early 90s. So, and maybe not be where he was at that time, but I could see why they still trying to recapture that same magic. So, but that's it for me for this week. As if you want to hear more of my thoughts, my rambling thoughts, you can check out my podcast, Comic Concierge. Check out GeekCast Radio as well. But for now, remember that comics are for everyone. The key is finding the right one. Until next time, thanks for watching.